Well, let's follow up on all of this with three members of Parliament. From the foyer of the Commons this evening, I'm joined by Parm Gill, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Peter Julian is the House Leader for the official opposition NDP. And Joyce Murray is the defence critic for the Liberal Party. Good to see you all. Thanks for taking time to be with me this evening. Mr. Gill, let me start with you. Let's begin with, because that was the genesis of a lot of the questions in the House of Commons today, with this lawsuit filed by the veterans that's unfolding in a courtroom in Vancouver. What are the optics of having a severely disabled group of veterans fighting their own government for better compensation?
Well, the first thing, Peter, I'd like to say is obviously this is a case, as you know, that's before the courts. So there is obviously very limited in terms of what I can say as it is before the courts. But what I can tell you is this is obviously to do with the new Veterans Charter, which was supported and passed in the House of Commons by all parties, both of my colleagues sitting here from the NDP and the Liberals as well. And there was also a comprehensive review that was conducted earlier this year on the new Veterans Charter review, which was also unanimously supported, and one of the top recommendations. The entire Standing Committee on Veterans Charter or Veterans Affairs endorsed the new Veterans Charter moving forward. But at the same time, we feel that these veterans should have an opportunity if they feel that they want to explore that opportunity in the courts. That's the democratic country that we live in, and everybody has an equal opportunity to do that.
All right, so I know you don't want to get to too much of the details of the case, but you're right. It hinges largely, as we've heard from Major Campbell, largely on the Veterans Charter and what he says it doesn't provide for him and others who've been injured, the same type of injuries. So is the government committed to staying with the Veterans Charter that is in place now? Because he's not the first person we've heard from that says there's a problem with this, the way this Veterans Charter treats compensation for veterans.
Well, listen, I mean, that's exactly as I mentioned. This new Veterans Charter was brought forward and passed unanimously in the House by all parties. It has been looked at over the years. Of course, there are some amendments that have been put forward that have been made in the past. At the same time, we recently conducted the comprehensive review, and at the committee, all three different parties came in favor of the new Veteran Charter, and moving forward we all believe that it is a way that can benefit our veterans moving forward, and it provides the best benefits and services.
Okay, Peter. So Mr. Julian, if all parties have supported the Veterans Charter and its different incarnations now, why are the New Democrats being so hard on the government for defending the way the Charter works in this court case in Vancouver?
Because it's how they've implemented it that's the problem. They're evading responsibility. We said all along that what we needed to do is enhance the services provided to veterans, and what this government has done is exactly the opposite. So we're seeing the court cases, we're seeing the denial of benefits. Half of disabled veterans don't have access to the disability pension that they should be getting by virtue of having put forward their body and themselves in service to the country. We're seeing $1 billion that was stolen away from veterans. It was approved by Parliament. So this idea, this smokescreen that the Conservatives are trying to put up, that somehow all parties agreed to our poor implementation of what was a fundamental principle that they have not been following.
Okay, so
it's just ridiculous.
What did the NDP not want in the Veterans Charter? I mean, the Veterans Charter spells out different, it's clear that it spells out different sort of levels of compensation depend on when you were in the service and so on. It's different for new veterans than it is for old veterans, because the new veterans get the lump sum payments. So
that's the implementation of how this government has taken it. But when you look at all of the cutbacks that we've seen to disability benefits, of course, to the $1 billion that was taken away, this is not part of what other parties agreed to. We simply did not agree to it, and we don't believe that this is in the interest of veterans.
Okay, so New Democratic Party government, let's be clear here, would do away with the lump sum benefits payment, go back to monthly payments.
We're saying that what we need to do is be listening to veterans, and what that means is putting the resources in place, not denying benefits. And the disability benefits is a very good example of this, Peter, that half of the veterans who are disabled are not able to access disability benefits. That's a national shame.
Right, but this case, and Joyce Murray, I'll get to you too here, this case involves a restoration of monthly disability veteran payments for some of these veterans, modern-day veterans who've suffered these serious injuries? Would New Democrats reinstate these monthly payments?
Well, we think there needs to be a balance in compensation, both a lump sum and also on a monthly basis. But this is something that requires more resources,
okay.
and we're not seeing this from this government. They closed 9 service centers that should have been veterans, and they cut back 1,000 staff that were providing services to veterans. So to say that this is somehow linked to the Veterans Charter is simply wrong.
Well, certainly the court case is linked to the Veterans Charter.
The court case, yes. But
Joyce Murray?
Well, Peter, it's very disingenuous of Parm to repeat the same lines that the minister gave us today and blame this on decisions made, 8, 9, 10 years ago. The reality is the new Veterans Charter was an effort to make things better for the veterans, and it was always understood to be a living document, that there would be some things that would have to be adjusted and fixed. And then we had 12 years of Afghanistan war. 40,000 troops went to war. Many came back injured, mentally or physically, and the new Veterans Charter simply had some major failings. I think the core problem is that the Prime Minister and the Veterans Affairs Minister do not believe in the sacred obligation to veterans, and that's what this court case is actually focused on. The government's lawyers are saying they don't owe a duty, or Canada doesn't owe a duty to care for these veterans, and they're fighting because the kind of payouts that they were receiving were less than they would receive if they were on WCB, and they had not put their lives on the line for Canadians. So that's simply unacceptable. This government's been dragging its feet to trying to pad its books so that they could be offering goodies in an election at the expense of veterans. And
let me have Mr. Gill respond here. Go ahead.
Well, the part of the problem is both of my colleagues here, with all due respect, they want best of both worlds. They're saying something else in front of the camera. They say something else in the House, and when we're studying it and looking at it before the committee, their actions are entirely different. As I mentioned, the new Veterans Charter comprehensive review was conducted this year. Both the members from the NDP and the Liberals are part of that committee, even though both of the members sitting next to me aren't on that committee, but there are members from both of these parties that worked with us on the comprehensive review. At the end of the day, recommended that new Veterans Charter is the best way moving forward. It's extremely unfortunate for them to be saying one thing in front of the camera here and saying completely the other, or members of their party in the committee or in the House of Commons. And the other thing, Peter, I like to remind all Canadians is, I'd like to ask both of my colleagues here, since 2006, would they like to tell us, was there a single initiative that they have supported in the House that goes to help Canada's veterans? If they would like to point a single one out for my benefit, I would appreciate it.
There's your Conservative government out of control and screaming into the cameras, but the reality is, as has been documented over the last few weeks, we are looking at an absolute shambles in Veterans Affairs, and that is having a profound impact on veterans. When you've got half of them that can't even access disability benefits when they're disabled in service to the country, when you've got veterans that are homeless, when you've got a cutback of 1,000 staff that are supposed to be providing services to veterans, and when this government says, oh, go online, find some services online, we're going to shut down the service centers as they have right across this country. I mean, this is an absolute shambles. It's a fiasco, and all this government can do is scream and yell into the cameras. It just shows how inappropriate their approach is.
Just a couple of minutes left for all of you. Let me Major Campbell told us in an interview earlier that when asked whether Mr. Fantino, because that was happening in the House again today, should be fired from his job, he said no, he didn't want to see him fired because the next minister would have an interesting learning curve he'd have to go through, but also no guarantee the next minister would get control of these decisions being made by bureaucrats. He describes this problem as a problem with bureaucrats that have sold this bill of goods to the government and to opposition parties about the Veterans Charter and other measures in terms of how to save money and so on. Is this a problem with Julian Fantino, or is this a problem with the people inside his department, Joyce Murray?
Well, it's the responsibility of the minister to fix the issues, to advocate for the veterans. not to be an apologist for the government, and to build trust amongst the people that he is supposed to serve, which is the veterans and their families. And he's done the absolute opposite. When caught out with problems, he's attacked veterans, he's attacked veterans' wives, and he attacks opposition members. So his credibility is shot, and that is the basic substance of necessary for being a minister. I mean, that's why we think that he should be fired and somebody brought into place that actually knows that their job is to fight for the veterans and not be an apologist for the Prime Minister or the government or the civil servants.
Let me hear from you, Mr. Let's sort of work backwards up the panel, Mr. Julian, then we'll hear from Mr. Gill on this. Is this a problem with the bureaucrats or with Mr. Fantino?
I'll tell you.
No, Peter, Julian, Mr. Gill, then I'll let you finish.
I'm next, Mr. Gill. The reality is Julian Fantino has been an utter failure as a minister, and he does have to go. And when you talk to veterans across the country, they acknowledge it's an absolute fiasco. The Veterans Affairs has no credibility. The ministry has no credibility. Now, that being said, the government direction is the one that I think needs to change, not just the minister. You've got a government that took away $1 billion approved by Parliament for veterans at a time when veterans are in dire straits. They took $1 billion away. It's absurd. And so Mr. Harper bears a great deal of the responsibility here. It's not just Mr. Fantino. Mr. Fantino has to go, but the government has to completely rethink how it approaches providing services to veterans in their last 9 months of government until we kick them out.
Mr. Gill, will finish up with you.
Well, I feel that actions speak much louder than words. Since taking office, it's clear our government has spent over $30 billion. That's $5 billion in additional funding that both of my colleagues in the party have opposed every single step of the way. Our actions speak much, much louder. Just last week, we also introduced that we're adding 8 different operational stress injury clinics across the country, the major one being in Halifax. And these are type of the benefits and services that we feel, obviously, our veterans need based on the demand and based on the research and based on the services we need to provide. We will continue to stand up for Canada's veterans and provide them the benefits and the services that
quickly, is there a problem with the bureaucracy at Veterans Affairs that any minister is having a tough time dealing with?
If you're going to ask me, are there areas of opportunity, are there areas of improvement? Absolutely. That's exactly what we recommended, the 14 recommendations that were made by the Veterans Affairs Committee in the unanimous report. Those are some of the things, and that's what we're feeling we can always improve, and we'll continue to do that as well.
All right. Time's gone for our discussion this evening, but we'll have a chance to revisit it again. Thank you all for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.